Tonight I would like to talk about faith or trust, Vertrauen. I'd like to begin with a story from the Christian tradition. Is it working? Because I'm a little bit doubting whether it's not, huh? Yeah, that's what I had here. There, it's working. Is it working for the? Maybe it doesn't, huh? For the onliners, it does. Do you hear me in the back? Okay. Usually, my voice is okay, but okay. So whatever it is, it's on, but whatever, it doesn't seem to work from the whole. As it's good when it works for the people online. Yeah, so the topic is faith and trust, Vertrauen, and a Christian story to begin with. Someone who had prayed a lot in their life complains to God that he had left her alone at times. God replies, "Try to trace back our tracks." And she reflects for some time, looks up, and answers, "Sometimes I can see 2 tracks, sometimes only 1. That is when I carried you," says God. The Pali word for faith or trust is sattha, and it comes from sam, which can be translated as well, and da, established. So well established, well founded, where to place one's heart upon. Sattha is one of the 5 spiritual faculties, qualities of the mind and heart that we cultivate, strengthen in order to liberate our heart from inner suffering. And those 5 are wisdom, faith, collectedness, energy, and mindfulness. And these 5 qualities consist of 2 pairs who balance each other, namely collectedness and energy, balancing each other, and wisdom and faith. And mindfulness acts as a kind of a supervisor who recognizes when they are not in balance and who tunes them again. Now, with regard to faith, which is a topic from tonight, this means that faith has to be balanced and strengthened by wisdom. Faith is not based on a belief, but it is based on our own experience and our own understanding. And to the degree that our insight, our understanding, our wisdom grows, to that degree our faith, our confidence, and our devotion to the practice deepens. I think that's quite obvious for all of us. And here's a story illustrating that faith alone is not enough, that it has to be balanced with clear seeing. 3 monks are on a boat trip, and after some time one of them announces to be hungry and, intending to go and eat something, gets out of the boat and walks across the water to the shore. Thereupon the second one declares that he is hungry too, gets out of the boat and walks across the water to the shore. The third one can hardly believe his eyes. Then he thinks, "What they know to do, I know too. Stop, wait, I come with you." He gets out of the boat in order to walk across the water, sinks, and the moment his head sticks out from the water, the others shout from the shore, "You have to step on the stones, of course." So faith has to be balanced with clear seeing. In the scriptures, 3 types of faith are mentioned. First one called bright faith. Perhaps we read something or we meet somebody who inspires us. For me, when I met and heard Ajahn Sumedho's teaching, he's the one furthest on the right here on the altar. When I heard his teaching, there was for me immediately a sense of kind of feeling like being at home, kind of trust of being understood what he was talking about. And it gave me a sense of energy and hope and motivated me to begin a spiritual practice. Or in my case, I even went to spend some time in his monastery after that. So it was kind of awoke within me this kind of bright faith. You know, there's something there that seems to be helpful for me. Now, this kind of initial inspired faith isn't necessarily connected with wisdom, with our own understanding. It can drift into blind faith. And I guess we all have heard of such stories, often with a painful end. Faith has the quality of allowing us to open, to draw near, and to go forth, to gather our energy, to pursue a goal or an inspiration. But faith also has to be carefully balanced with wisdom. If we have too much faith without enough wisdom, then it really becomes what we ordinarily call blind faith. We can be very naive, perhaps. We can, with bright faith, hear somebody, and they might be impressive, and they move us, and we experience an extraordinary feeling of inspiration. And then the next day, we hear somebody else, and they say a different thing, and we feel inspired by them. And this might be mere belief, faith without enough wisdom. Now, the second kind of faith is called verified faith. A deeper kind of faith grows with our own practice, with our own discriminating wisdom. When, in my case, in my example, when I actually continued practicing during the time in the monastery that I went to when after I've heard teachings by Ajahn Sumedho, when I investigated the teaching, when we, it was not just me then, but we all, when we are not content with just reading or hearing the teachings, we learn for ourselves, which leads to a verified faith. U Pandita Sayadaw talks about this kind of faith. He says, it is our faith that raindrops will get us wet. I quite like this example. It is our faith that raindrops will get us wet. We've experienced rain, and we've experienced wetness, and thus we know how it is. Now the third kind of faith is called unshakable faith. It is when there is no more doubt in the mind about the path of liberation. This deep trust is compared with a magic jewel that, when thrown into water, has the power to purify it. And all dirt and mud sinks to the bottom and the water becomes crystal clear. And in its completion, faith has this power in our mind. It lets doubt and turmoil sink so that inspiration and energy can manifest. The Buddha, on the importance of this quality of faith, as a burnt seed is incapable to let a sprout grow, so a mind without faith is incapable to cultivate something wholesome. It is also said that faith functions as a gateway through which all positive mind states can appear. And I think if we all wouldn't have any kind of faith, some kind of faith, small or big, that we can cultivate our mind and heart, we all wouldn't be here in this very moment. Now the question is, how do we strengthen faith? Or if we think we lack it completely, how can we bring it into being? What prevents us from having faith or more faith? I would say we always have faith. However, there is the question, faith in what? Where do we place our faith? Where do we place our heart, if not in our potential for freedom? Perhaps we might place our heart or trust in our critical mind, our negativities. We believe in our aversions, in our wanting mind, in our well-protected conclusions and opinions about us, about others, about life. We could say, with an untrained mind, we are faithful to our mental habits and get lost in the greedy, the aversive, the doubting mind. And of course, whenever we keep faith in these habits, there is no space in our mind and heart for anything new and fresh. Or sometimes we are identified with certain views, opinions, doubts, and we don't see it, that we are identified. And of course, having opinions or doubts is not a problem in itself. Examining for ourselves and not just believing what's been said is actually very much encouraged in this practice, as we have seen it being the cause for verified faith, knowing for ourselves, experiencing for ourselves. But not recognizing an opinion as an opinion or doubt as doubt might imprison us into its narrow view, which is often followed by a sense of separateness and fear. And I'd like to come back later on to the doubting mind state, which is obviously quite the opposite of a faithful, trusting mind. Believing our comparing mind undermines faith. We grasp perhaps past experiences and project them into the future. If it's been a pleasant experience, we try to recreate it. If it's been unpleasant, we might try to avoid it. In both ways, we can't relax into this very moment, the only one we ever have. in our life. A spiritual practitioner puts it quite radically. He says, faith is a form of radical acknowledgement of the presence of truth in this very moment. Do not doubt whether or not you are practicing faith. Consider only where it is placed. Radical acceptance is the practice of faith. Or Rainer Maria Rilke calls it the timidity, die Schüchternheit, the timidity towards a new, not to be foreseen experience to which one doesn't feel up, that keeps us from being trusting and fully alive. Perhaps we might think we first have to overcome this timidity and then we will be able to open and meet the unknown. But I think it's not so much the timidity itself that keeps us locked in, but our being busy with this timidity. So instead of viewing it as a hindrance to our freedom, we can turn towards it and include it in our awareness or in, as we do here, in our metta attitude. Faith also means trusting the process. It needs a willingness to let go of our views and opinions and surrender to the unknown of each moment. And this willingness takes, of course, at times quite some courage, and this again and again. And Thanisra, a former nun in the Thai forest tradition and spiritual teacher, she puts it quite bluntly. She says, the journey of awakening is not an incense-scented walk through a bed of roses. It's a demanding look at reality. Each time we dare looking at this reality, even in so-called insignificant moments, trust and faith deepens. Trust that we have the capacity to meet this moment, this body sensation, this emotion, this memory. Mechthild of Magdeburg, she was a German visionary in the 13th century, and she expressed those moments of acceptance as follows. The day of my spiritual awakening was the day I saw and knew I saw all things in God and God in all things. Nothing left out. One could perhaps say that faith is the perfume of our true nature. The more we are attracted by this fragrance, the less attractive all the other perfumes of this world become. And instead of taking refuge in that which is constantly changing and thus unreliable, we take refuge in our own potential to be free. We can take refuge in life's lawfulness and in all the ways and means who support us in living in harmony with this truth. And we learn to turn more often towards kindness, towards benevolence, instead towards harshness and cruelty. And we turn for guidance to those beings who have realized inner freedom and those who inspire and who support us. So it's a moment-to-moment matter. Where do I put my faith in this very moment? In my fears, my ideas, my concepts how life should be, in my doubts whether this practice works, or in this one wholesome moment of one phrase of metta offered to this one person. Brother David Steindl-Rast, Christian monk, very active in interreligious dialogue, spiritual teacher and author, he writes, "Faith is not expected to give complete satisfaction to the intellect. It leaves the intellect suspended in obscurity, in Unklarheit. Yet it does not frustrate the intellect or deny it or destroy it. It pacifies it with a conviction which it knows it can accept quite rationally under the guidance of love." When life does not do what we expect it to do, when life is unpleasant, or when we get sick, when we get old, or even much simpler, when we get sleepy in our meditation, do we believe we have failed? Or can we keep our confidence, our dignity amongst all the life's changes? And also, we all know it's not an easy task to do that. Thomas Merton, another Christian monk who spent a lot of his time in solitude, "True prayer and love are really learned in the hour when prayer becomes impossible and your heart turns to stone." So do we have the faith to even hold our heart turned to stone with care and acceptance? Or our fears, or whatever our challenge might be? Krishnamurti, "The aim does not consist of liberating yourself from fear. In the very moment you try to liberate yourself from fear, you create resistance to fear. Every resistance to fear is useless. Instead of running away from fear, controlling, suppressing, or any other way of offering resistance, it is important to understand it. This means observe it, learn from it, turn yourself towards it. We do not have to escape fear, but learn to meet it with courage in order to learn from it." And I would like here to add, we have to learn not only to meet it with courage, but with metta, with care, with understanding that it's not always easy. In my early years of practice, I lived about 1.5 years in a Buddhist monastery in England, where Ajahn Sumedho, that I have been mentioning before, was the abbot. And during that time, my practice consisted mostly of letting go of my ideas and opinions about how life in a Buddhist monastery should be, how people living in a Buddhist monastery should be. From home, I was used to have my own space, my own room, where I could retreat, which was very different in the monastery. I often had to share rooms with women who came and visited. And for some time I was in charge also of those women guests. And often there were many, and there were no time and space for myself. And after some time I found myself running into the nearby forest and shouting, "I can't stand it anymore." And another time, I remember again running to the forest, same situation, shouting, but being in the forest all by myself, I got this insight. There's actually nobody here. I'm all by myself, but I'm still carrying them around. It was a very helpful insight. I was also in charge of the big garden, and of course I had it all planned out, how the garden would look like when I put enough effort into it. But usually I wouldn't have any help for that, because help was needed for other things. So I got over and over disappointed because there was no way I could ever succeed putting my ideas how the garden should look into actual reality. And I remember one day sitting in the midst of the garden, quite frustrated, and Ajahn Sumedho, the abbot, was coming across, and I confessed to him my distress, and he looked around in the garden and after some time said, "Perfect garden." And it was only at this moment that I could see, and even not only see, that even appreciate the garden as it was, and not as it should be, according to my plans. So again and again, I could see my patterns of holding on to ideas and feeling the pain while those ideas were clashing with reality. And again, I could also experience the peace in the cessation of clinging to those ideas. And thus, through my own experience, faith in the practice was growing. Faith that through practice inner suffering can be overcome. So the second kind of faith was deepening, this verified faith. And also the faith into the law of cause and effect, that actions based on a wholesome motivation actually brings wholesome results for me and often also for others. And here I would like to look briefly into the opposite of faith, namely the doubting mind. Of course, there are many sides to doubt. There is a kind of doubt that is very positive. It allows for investigation, which says, I'm not going to accept this just because somebody else says it. I really want to know for myself. And this is really the cutting edge of wisdom, the voice that says, I want to know for myself, not just because you say that it is so. And this, of course, is echoed in the teachings of the Buddha, such as the Kalama Sutta, in which people say something like, here in this village there are so many teachers of spirituality who come and go. Some say this and some say that. There are all kinds of different messages and different instructions and different ways of practice that are offered. How do we know what's true? What's worth doing? That was their question to the Buddha. And the Buddha's response was something like, put it into practice. Don't believe anything just because I say it or some worthy being says it. Don't believe anything because it is held to be traditionally true. Don't believe anything because you've read it. Believe it is true from your own experience. If you put it into practice and you find that this particular meditation or spiritual practice leads to a diminishing of greed and desire in your mind, then you can trust that. If you find that it leads to a diminishing of anger and hatred and fear in your mind, you can trust that. If you find it leads to clarity, so there's less delusion, there's less feeling of being cut off and disconnected, you can trust that. You put it into practice, that's how you know. That's about, not in the exact wording, but that's about the content of that sutta. So, obviously, this aspect of doubt, of not just believing in something because somebody else says it, is very helpful and it is even encouraged. But of course there is another aspect of doubt that is far less helpful, namely endless speculation. Sometimes doubt is actually an excuse to remove oneself from a situation and not to put something into practice. We can then stand back and judge, speculate, not commit ourselves, not take a risk, not see what happens if we actually practice it. But all of this is a process of intellectualization. It is not at all from our own experience. And there might perhaps even be a feeling of empowerment that comes from standing apart, but it is really a very shallow kind of strength. This is a way of protecting ourselves because we don't have to take the risk and commit ourselves and open up to something and then see what happens. But really, the strength we then feel, which is a kind, perhaps even of conceit, is a very short-lived. It will not actually give us the sustained strength and confidence to discover the truth for ourselves. In the traditional texts, they describe doubt as being like a traveler at a crossroads. You just don't know which way to go. Rather than trying a way and see what happens, you just stand there waiting for enlightenment to strike you. We can't make a decision as to which way to try, and that is the most draining and debilitating characteristic of doubt with which we can get struck. Coleridge, I'm not sure how to actually say the name properly, he was a British poet. He said something about poetry, but I think it's quite, can also be said about faith. He says, it is the willing suspension of disbelief, das freiwillige Aufgeben des Unglaubens. A willingness to be open, to explore, to investigate, rather than taking up a belief or not even try. And last, I would like to look for a moment into another quality which seems closely connected to faith and trust, namely patience. On this path, we need infinite patience, patience with our mind, patience with our habits, patience with ourselves, patience with other people. Rainer Maria Rilke, in a letter, gives advice to a young poet, probably known to many of you. Being an artist, and we could say being a meditator, a practitioner, means not reckoning, nicht berechnen, and counting, but ripening like the tree which does not force its sap and stands confident in the storms of spring without the fear that after them may come no summer. It does come, but it comes only to the patient who are there as though eternity lay before them, so unconcernedly still and wide. Patience is everything. Now, what helps us to be patient with our practice is having a long and wide perspective. A perspective that reaches beyond this very moment and beyond just our own well-being. A spiritual journey that does not only serve our own peace and happiness, but the welfare of all beings and all aspects of life. Being patient, being patient also means meeting those times when faith is lacking and fears and doubts are in the foreground with kindness and gentleness and understanding and tolerance. And here I would like again to read short text by Ajahn Sucitto, which I have read yesterday afternoon. When we hold ourselves with the mind of goodwill, we don't have to feel intimidated and compelled to prove ourselves. We have all been small, weak, and stupid. We have all been totally irresponsible infants, awkward adolescents, made a mess of things. But our current responsibility is one of cultivating virtue, discernment, and kindness, not of obsessing and sustaining the burden of guilt and denial. And one of the major healing tools for this process is metta. We can accept the presence of the pity-mindedness, the guilt and anxiety as visitors conditioned into the mind and work with them. Then there is nothing to hide from or dread anymore. This is a more useful approach than going through another round of anguish, self-hatred, and defensiveness. By stilling these reactions, metta enables us to penetrate to and remove the root cause of ill will, often towards ourselves. With impatience, we might rush through the phrases, coming back to the formal metta practice, hoping that if we do it right and long enough, then one time in the future, metta will fill our mind and heart. But one phrase in itself is an expression of metta. For that moment, no other, often unwholesome negative thought that is in the mind is not actually there. And patience in the metta practice means trust in our wholesome intention. I think trust and patience are very close. With impatience we cannot settle into this one moment, into this one phrase. We are looking for results. The desire is at work. And here's a simple statement by Suzuki Roshi, a Japanese Zen master, who says, "It's in those moments when your practice is colored with greed, when you get discouraged." It's quite obvious, I think. But we've all experienced this. Practice cannot be done by willpower alone. We need forbearance towards ourselves when we notice again and again how strong painful habits can be. Also the habit of anger, of impatience, of restlessness, and of desire. And Shantideva, in his guide to patience, says, although living beings don't think, I get angry, they get angry. Although the anger does not think, I will arise, it causes and conditions arise accordingly. And we do not wake up in the morning and think, this is a good day for anger, do we? Also, faith and trust, they cannot be forced. It shrinks in the presence of impatient demands, and it expands in a climate of patient tolerance. Hafiz, Persian poet and Sufi master, says, how did the rose ever open its heart and give to this world all its beauty? It felt the encouragement of light against its being. Otherwise, we all remain too frightened. And instead of light, we could say it felt the encouragement of metta in our case. Otherwise, we all remain too frightened. Metta helps our mind to open and to trust. And it takes both. It takes the effort, the courage, again and again, to cultivate wisdom and compassion and kindness, and at the same time the devotion, the humbleness, the humility of letting go of expectations and just trusting our good intention. One moment of connecting with ourselves, one moment of wishing ourselves well, one moment of connecting with the other person, one moment of wishing them well. What else would make more sense? And thus our spiritual journey unfolds in its own pace, in its own time, and in its own unique way. And I'd like to end with a story of the Middle East that illustrates that when we are willing, when we do have the courage to put our ideas and doubts and desires and aversions aside and trust and give it a try and just practice that which is wholesome, such as metta, that it will actually reveal the way out of our prison of concern and lead us to a deeper sense of kindness and connectedness and inner freedom. A man falsely identified as a criminal was put in prison. His friend visited and left him a prayer carpet, ein Gebetsteppich. The prisoner went angrily back to his cell. He had hoped for a knife, and all he had gotten was this carpet. But since he had it, he figured he might as well use it. So he started bowing on the carpet to pray. Each day he became more familiar with the pattern woven into the carpet, and he started to see an interesting image. It was a diagram of the lock that allowed him to open the cell and escape. Freedom of the heart is found not by looking up. It is right here, woven in colors beneath our feet. So let's just sit for a moment quietly.